Hello and welcome. My name is Jennifer Gates, Field Services Director for the California Preservation Foundation. We want to thank you for joining this webinar entitled California Architecture, One State, Divisible or Indivisible, and encourage you to become a member of CPF and enjoy the benefits and educational discounts. Information on membership and our upcoming education programs can be found on our website. The California Preservation Foundation is a membership-based, not-for-profit organization whose mission is to provide statewide leadership in education and advocacy to ensure protection of historic resources in California. The format for today's webinar will include a presentation followed by time for questions and answers. There is a toolbar on the right side of your screen. If you have a question at any time during the presentation, please type it in the box and we will hold the question until the end for the presenter to answer. You will be muted throughout the presentation. To hide or unhide this toolbar, click on the orange arrow. Please adjust your volume on your computer or phone. Today's presentation will be by Alan Hess. Architect and historian Alan Hess is the architecture critic of the San Jose Mercury News. He has written 19 books on modern architecture and urbanism in the mid-20th century. His latest book, Frank Lloyd Wright, Natural Design, Organic Architecture, was published in October 2012. He has written monographs on architects Oscar Niemeyer, Frank Lloyd Wright, and John Lautner, as well as architectural histories of Las Vegas and Palm Springs. Hess's other books include Googie, Ultra-Modern Roadside Architecture, Forgotten Modern, and The Ranch House. He is currently researching the architecture of Irvine, California, one of the United States' largest master plan communities of the 1960s and 70s. Hess was a National Arts Journalism Program Fellow at Columbia University's School of Journalism and received a grant from the Graham Foundation for Advanced Studies in the Fine Arts to research the work of Brazilian landscape architect Roberto Burle Marx. Hess has been active in the preservation of post-World War II architecture, qualifying several significant buildings for the National Register of Historic Places, including the oldest McDonald's drive-in restaurant. Thank you for joining us today, Alan.
Good. Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you to everybody who's out there. I have a lot to talk about today. This is an interesting subject to me because we have seen California as either a Northern California architecture or Southern California architecture to a great degree. And critics from Lewis Mumford to Douglas Haskell through the years have tended to focus on one side of the state or the other. And it became a great deal of interest to me to ask whether or not that was true. Are they two separate, completely separate areas with their own distinct and characteristic architecture, or are they one state that has a lot of diversity to it but still expressing common ideas? So I am actually now working on a book on this subject with Pierluigi Serrano, just at the initial stages, so it'll be a while, and it's a huge subject. But we do hope to look at the 20th century in architecture in California and see in depth what was going on, what are the common themes, what is distinctive about each part of the state, and what is common about each part of the state. I've got a lot of slides. I'm going to move quickly. It's a big state. But I'm hoping to, if not to answer the question in the title, at least to open up a lot of questions about it and areas of interest, further research, areas that I think are important to discuss so that we have a better sense of California architecture. I also want to tell you about, if you have not heard about it, there are two interesting architecture exhibits coming up in 2013 that you should know about. First of all, the Getty Museum here in Los Angeles is going to have an architectural survey of Southern California from 1940 to 1990, 50 years. And survey has not really been done since the 1970s. It takes in the whole, well, it takes in this aspect of architecture. So that is going to be a really important exhibit. It's going to define Southern California architecture for many years to come. So it's a part of the Pacific Standard Time exhibits that they started last year. And the other exhibit coming up next year may seem a little far afield, but it's actually quite related. Cranbrook Academy, back in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, is going to have an exhibit starting in June on Michigan modernism, because in the 20th century, Michigan had a great role to play in terms of architecture in the United States. Big names like Eero Saarinen and Minoru Yamasaki. But when you scratch the surface a little bit, there are some really interesting connections between Los Angeles and Detroit in the 20th century. Probably the most famous one is Charles Eames, who studied at Cranbrook in the 40s, but then came to Los Angeles to have his stupendous career. So I think there are going to be some really interesting insights between those two exhibits coming up. Let's see. Some of the bigger issues as well, just to give you kind of an idea of where we're going to be going over the next 55 minutes or so. I'm going to be talking about some of the modern roots of California architecture, both north and south. And then investigate a bit some of the particular characteristics, how California architecture has innovated, especially in terms of steel, concrete, and wood architecture. I'm going to throw out a number of architects' names that we need a lot of further research on, and if there's anybody out there in the audience there who is interested in following up on any of those, let me know, and I'll be glad to guide you in certain directions from whatever I may know. One of the most important parts of California architecture in the 20th century, and also one reason why it has been not completely and thoroughly examined, is its innovations in suburban architecture. California is a suburban state. Its architecture, its cities are really suburban metropolises, talking about places like Santa Clara County up north, and Orange County and the San Fernando Valley in Southern California, San Diego as well. And so there's been a bias against suburbia in general. I think it's raised its ugly head again in recent decades as well, which is all the more reason why we need to look carefully and accurately at California architecture and find out exactly what went on in that period. So there's several aspects of suburbia that we're going to talk about, including planning. Though we aren't going to ignore the traditional city centers, high-rise architecture as well. So let's get started. Here are two slides, a building on the left by Henry Hill, a house, and on the right by Rafael Soriano. And this is the 2-cents version of how people look at California architecture. Northern California is woodsy, wide eaves, homey, residential, and surrounded by nature, trees and planting and so forth. Southern California, it is widely believed, is all steel and glass, as in the Soriano house that you see there. High-tech, shiny, sharp-edged, and this is the way that the two halves of the state are often seen and presented and understood. The real story is not nearly so simple as that. For example, here is a case study house. I believe it's number 24 from the famous Arts and Architecture series of case study houses. This was built in the early 1960s. It is steel. It is glass, as you can see. However, this was built in San Rafael, Northern California, not Southern California, by Beverly Thorne. Here's a woodsy house with glulam beams and nature all around. Again, fitting the stereotype of Northern California architecture. However, this happens to be in Malibu, and it was designed in the 1980s by Ed Niles. It also happens to be Johnny Carson's house. Then there are the Green brothers, who are certainly known as Southern California architecture, but the Thorson house is built in Berkeley. Or Julia Morgan is known as a Northern California architect, but this is the Los Angeles Examiner building that she built in downtown Los Angeles. This is the Stonestown Shopping Center in Northern California, in San Francisco. It was designed, however, by Welton Beckett, a well-known Southern California architect. And of course, Sea Ranch, up in the northern coast of Northern California, quintessentially Northern California wood set in nature by Moreland and Turnbull and Whitaker, really a trend-setting, very influential building. But Charles Moore, part of that partnership, also taught at UCLA. This is his condo in Westwood, so he built in both parts of the state. The Transamerica building, one of the most famous buildings, notable buildings in San Francisco, was by William Pereira, a major Southern California architect. And the Eichler houses were started in Sunnyvale in Northern California, but were designed both by Anshin and Allen from San Francisco and Jones and Emmons from Southern California. Then there's certain architects like John Portman, who's from Atlanta, but he designed both the Bonaventure in LA and the Hyatt Regency in San Francisco. Edward Durrell Stone also. This is one of his campus buildings at USC, but also the Stanford Hospital in Palo Alto he designed in 1959. So there are architects who work in both sides of the state and bring ideas from one part of the state to another. I want to examine some of the modern roots now of architecture and how we view architecture. What is the, and again, I am challenging the common narrative about California architecture, because I think we need to. We need to be more accurate about what actually happened. One of the big stories, narratives about California architecture in general is that modernism was brought by Europeans sometime in the 1920s. Good example of this, of course, is one of the most famous houses in the state, the Kaufman House in Palm Springs by Richard Neutra. And the flat roof, the metallic surfaces, the indoor-outdoor character of the house, all quintessentially modern, but which have been attributed solely to the introduction of European ideas, European modern ideas from the Bauhaus, for example, into California in the 1920s. About the same time up in San Francisco, Eric Mendelsohn, again, another European, moved to San Francisco in the 1940s, and this is the Russell House, which he designed in Pacific Palisades. So there's no question that there is a great deal of influence from any number of European immigrants to California. But what we need to understand more today, I think, is how much native architects and native architectural ideas native to the region have influenced our sense of modernism. Even going back to the 1880s when Stanford was built by a Boston firm, Shepley, Rutan, and Coolidge, but on a scale and using a scale for the future, so it was modern in that sense, and using elements of the regional Spanish style, the arcades, the masonry walls, tile roofs, etc., but also which used that local vernacular, the Spanish vernacular, in an absolutely beautiful way. Obviously, this has been a very influential building because of the quality of the design and the way it fits into California so successfully. Then the roots of modernism also go back to the arts and crafts movement, which began in the late 19th century in England, quickly came over to the United States, New York, but also took root in California in a very profound way. And it demonstrates, I mean, it introduced a number of modern ideas, but it also demonstrates just how California changes architects and architecture. These are buildings. On the upper right is a church by Ernest Coxhead. Lower right is Julia Morgan. And in Belvedere also the Belvedere Land Company building up in the upper left as well. When immigrant architects came to California, their ideas were often transformed into something new. This is the Women's Club building on the peninsula by Julia Morgan as well. The use of rustic materials, the use of vernacular forms and shapes, and certainly the integration of nature in the trellises, in the planting, in the large amount of sort of window, etc., as well as the siding. All of these really do draw from California. One of the best examples has to be the first Church of Christ Scientist in Berkeley by Bernard Maybeck. Absolutely an extraordinary building which could not have been built anywhere else. It includes many of the themes that we will see in modern architecture in California, specifically the use of new materials, concrete, factory sash windows, railroad trusses for the roof as well. But it transforms those with a sense of history, both early Christian history and Gothic history, and all of these to create something new. This is part of the nature of California architecture. The use of sculpture, ornament, etc. These early modernists, Bernard Maybeck, Julia Morgan, Willis Polk, Ernest Coxhead, and others, had no problem about accepting the past. They integrated the past into their modern architecture. They had no problem with ornament, as later European modernists would. They delighted, as you can see in this door at the Berkeley Church, in ornament and color and shape and form. While those architects in Northern California were being influenced by the arts and crafts movement, in Southern California, another set of architects were using the arts and crafts ideas in, again, a way unseen anyplace else in the world. This, of course, is the Gamble House by the Green brothers as well, suited with its wide eaves to the sunlight and the climate of Southern California. So, both in Northern California and Southern California, these architects used arts and crafts ideas, but transformed them for the specific character of their areas. Irving Gill, also an early modernist, was the Horatio Court apartments that he designed in Santa Monica, the Venice area. And it should not be forgotten that Irving Gill worked with Louis Sullivan in the early part of his career. On the right-hand side of the screen is Sullivan's Wainwright building in St. Louis as well. The sharp, clean lines, the definition of windows, and the use of forms in the case of Gill using concrete to create these sharp forms, being all part of the modern movement. So I want to look quickly at a couple of these technologies that these California architects, north and south, used: steel, concrete, and wood. And one of the most famous is probably the Eames House in 1949 by Charles Eames, steel and glass. You can't get more definitive or more elegant in using the mass-produced characteristics of steel and glass members in a house. But in Northern California, there are architects, including Don Knorr and others, who also used steel and glass. It wasn't just in Southern California. In fact, this Soriano house that I showed you at the very beginning, as quintessentially Southern California, is actually built in Northern California. Beverly Thorne, who designed that case study house number 24, also designed this house. You can see the steel beam, which allowed him to build on a very, very difficult, steep site. This house also happens to be the house of Dave Brubeck, the jazz musician as well, thereby bridging modern architecture and modern music in this period, the early 1950s. This, again, is Beverly Thorne's case study house as it appears today, still in good condition. And in commercial architecture, we see steel also being used in this car wash. These prototypes exist both in Northern and Southern California. For concrete, you certainly can't do better than Maybeck's Christian Science Church, again, that I showed you a bit earlier as well. The foundations, the pillars are poured-in-place concrete, and then a light roof of wood is based on top of those. But as you can see in the gilt, in the color, in the paint, in the form, the volutes, and so forth, he is using concrete in an extremely creative way. Bertram Goodhue, in designing the Los Angeles Library downtown, also used concrete in the mid-1920s very successfully. Rudolf Schindler, another European, but one who came over to the United States, worked with Frank Lloyd Wright, and in the Level House in Newport Beach in Southern California, created these 5 concrete vents or frames and worked the house and all of its spaces very creatively through it. Another use of concrete in a new way. Another Frank Lloyd Wright student, John Lautner, of course, built many concrete buildings. This is the Sheets Goldstein house, using these concrete, triangulated concrete coffers as a structure of the living room. There are lesser-known architects like Alfred Browning Parker, he was in Florida, Foster Rhodes Jackson. All of these Wright students had 3 names for some reason. This is Foster Rhodes Jackson in Pomona. Not very well-known architect. He only worked really in Pomona area. But this is his own house in which he uses Wright's desert stone construction, stone, natural stone from the area embedded in the concrete, but in a form, a 2-story open living room space, which is unlike anything in Wright's work. In Big Sur, halfway between Northern and Southern California as well. This is the house of Nathaniel Owings, one of the partners of Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, which was designed in the 1950s. Pafford Keating Clay, this is on the hills of, as you can see, in Marin County, also using concrete. Interesting architect, probably the only person who worked both with Le Corbusier and Frank Lloyd Wright. Or this house in Kent Woodlands by Jack Hilmer and Warren Callister as well. Just a remarkable house, again, wood and concrete. But the concrete, which you see in the foundation, the slanting walls, is one of the first uses of pre-tensioned concrete structure, a new way of engineering concrete at that time. The Fremont City Hall also shows the way that concrete can be used for public buildings. This building, unfortunately, has now been demolished. Or Edward Durrell Stone at Stanford Hospital as well, using concrete and taking advantage of the decorative aspect in the way that the concrete blocks can catch the sunlight, taking advantage of the regional characteristics. Or Warren Callister's Christian Science Church in Belvedere. The interior that you can see on the left is with the fireplace right in the middle, is a concrete pillar that the redwood beams slope off of on both sides. In wood, Rowan made another Frank Lloyd Wright student, as it happens, designed this house in Sausalito as well. This is a house in San Rafael also by Fred and Lois Langhorst. Fred Langhorst also worked with Frank Lloyd Wright. And you can see the experiment using these V-shaped trusses, columns, beams. This shows you what it looks like on the inside as well, to create a really remarkable space. Or John Lautner, who was known for his concrete work, but here in the Siegel House from 1983, that great curved element across the left-hand side of the house is a glulam beam. So he uses glulam and its sculptural qualities in the same way that he uses concrete in other houses. Or the simplicity of Campbell and Wong's prefab A-frame houses as well, using just the lightest wood structure, but to create an easy and efficient house. These A-frame houses, starting in the 1950s, became widely used for vacation homes up in the mountains, in Tahoe, and elsewhere. Of course, in Tahoe, it was very effective in shedding the snow because of the slant of the roof, so it fits the regional characteristic. And then the shingles that we saw originally in the houses and buildings of Julia Morgan and Maybeck and Polk came around again in the 1960s and 1970s in the Bay Area, repeating and reinforcing that use of wood that is notable in California architecture. As I mentioned, there are quite a number of houses and architects that we don't know that much about. And I wanted to just show you a couple, give you a sense of the real diversity of architecture throughout California, first starting in the South, because this is one of the things which belies the simplistic narrative that Northern California architecture is wood, Southern is steel, and that's that. As you can see, diversity, not simplicity, is one of the aspects of California architecture throughout the 1930s. This is a late house by Rudolf Schindler, one of the great architects of California, who started with concrete at his own house in West Hollywood, but then moved to adopt the contractor vernacular of the 2x4 frame. Just very simple and inexpensive, affordable construction. But you get a sense here of how Schindler is able to use that very mundane building system to create balconies, high windows, trellises, etc., to enrich the architecture. John Lautner, of course, is fairly well-known architect now. He used to be not as well-known, but fortunately has come into his own. His house, one of his houses, the Garcia House from the early 1960s on Mulholland Drive, with a concrete roof, but with a steel undercarriage to hold the house. Lloyd Wright, the son of Frank Lloyd Wright, this is the Bowler House, which he designed, using, again, dramatic modern materials. That blue fringe on the house is corrugated plastic, a modern material, but it both integrates the house into the sky and creates an extension and shading also for the house. An interesting architect also is Harwell Hamilton Harris. He was a native of California, born out in the Imperial Valley. Worked first with Richard Neutral in the 1920s. He worked on the Lovell Health House by Richard Neutra in the Hollywood Hills. But then he moved on to create his own architecture. He did not follow strictly in the lines of modernism as Neutra had defined it. And he worked all over the state, really all over the country. On the upper left is the Havens House in the Berkeley Hills. On the lower right is the Mary Blair House in Silver Lake as well. In the Havens House, you can see how he's using a wood structural truss. Usually it's used in reverse. Here he uses it upside down so that the slanting, upward sweeping roof line, ceiling line will both take in the views. This looks out over San Francisco Bay, and also provide some measure of protection from the sun. Though, of course, this faces due west, and there's no escape from the sun in the Berkeley Hills in the evening. Haralam Georgescu in Beverly Hills. You see here a reflection. He was a Hungarian who came in the 1930s, late 1930s, to California, and with this really thin, slender, elegant sense of modernism. Foster Rhodes Jackson that we saw before. Edward Thicket. This is a house on the beach, at Manhattan Beach, as you can see, using wood and balconies and glass to create an indoor-outdoor space. In its straight lines, its structurally expressive form, this is very close to the kind of the type of modern California architecture that we have come to expect. But in this house by Alan Morris in Silver Lake, his own home and studio, we see the adventure of Southern California architects in using steel, in using curves, in using unusual forms, in using color. Notice the turquoise tile that accents the brick structure here. Or Paul R. Williams, Southern California architect. This is a house he designed in Ontario. Not quite as daringly modern as the steel and glass Eames house. It's a wood frame house, but with plenty of window space, opening to the garden, and, which you can't quite see here, on the second floor, the bedroom wings with the upswept roof looks out on a panorama of the San Gabriel Mountain. So it's fitting its place. Paul Williams is mostly known for his houses, which are more traditional, colonial, Tudor, etc. But he and this architect, Wallace Neff, also known for his traditional style, also made the transition to modernism. This is the Groucho Marx house from the late 1950s, Truesdale Estates, Beverly Hills as well. And you can see how Wallace Neff, though known for his traditional styles, could very effectively work in modern styles as well. Another example of the variety, the diversity, is this, the Menifee House from 1960 by John Wolfe. It is a modern house, but he's obviously drawing, as Maybeck did earlier in the century, on classical, in this case French, and even Beaux-Arts aspects of symmetry, of decoration, of dominant and subsidiary wings as well, but a very active architect in Southern California. Now let's take a look at the north and just get an overview of from some of the famous to some of the less known architects. This is a very well-known architect, William Worcester, for his own beach house, very influential architect, using vernacular forms that he was aware of as a boy growing up in the Stockton area, of barns, of ranch houses, of wood structures, which were very simple, very easy to build, and Worcester adopted many of those forms in his very elegant and often very expensive houses. Notice the proportions of the windows, and he transforms this vernacular form into something really extraordinary. Inside, just very simple, modern volumes, use of the view outward as well. Gardner Gailey, contemporary of Worcester's, many of the same characteristics in his architecture of that time. Mario Corbett, high above a Wolfback Ridge in Marin County as well, turning the house towards the view of San Francisco Bay. Serge Chermayeff, interesting architect from Germany, one of the few immigrant architects who settled in San Francisco in the late 1930s, escaping Nazism and so forth, in designing with local architects. Goodwin Steinberg, not as well known, prominent architect in the San Jose area, but started his career designing houses like this one, which shows the innovative use of a glulam beam. Jack Hilmer, with this just really extraordinary house on Belvedere as well. Jack Hilmer combined the simplicity of Mies van der Rohe with the richness of Frank Lloyd Wright, which you see in the use of redwood throughout this house. And on the inside, that fireplace, that's one solid piece of granite that he had shipped from the Sierra Nevadas down to use as a centerpiece. The simple scale, that's an enormous table that you see there near the sofa. You have really kind of no idea of the scale of this house because of the simplicity of the forms. Warren Callister as well, very interesting architect. Born in Texas, but moved to the Bay Area after World War II, as many did. Many of the architects working that came to California in that period had seen California during World War II and vowed to return after the war to establish their practices. George Rockrise on Belvedere Island as well. Notice the combination of wood and concrete. Marquis and Stoller in Sausalito, classic modern house with flat roof, fitted to the unusual site, the hilly site, leaving the trees wherever possible. Or this house, also by Marquis and Stoller, creating 3 pavilions on Mount Tamalpais, overlooking Mill Valley. But California is not just a story of residential architecture. It's also about commercial architecture. It's about gas stations. It's about billboards. It's about restaurants like this Sardi's by Rudolph Schindler on Hollywood Boulevard from the 1930s. Right next to, incidentally, an office building for Universal Pictures by Richard Neutra. It's an architecture, California architecture is about the car and new solutions for living with the car. This is the 1928 Yucca Vine Market by Lloyd Wright as well. A prophetic building in how to create an architecture which matches this new culture of the automobile. We see it come to its highest point in the series of Simon's drive-in restaurants by Wayne McAllister, a San Diego native who really helped to define the modern age in California. This building and others like it by McAllister are among the most modern buildings of the 20th century. Supermarkets by Stiles O. Clements, like this Ralph's, built in the 1940s in Beverly Hills. Nightclubs by George Vernon Russell, Ciro's nightclub on Sunset Strip as well, using modern forms, but notice the pattern of the center and the curves to mark the entryway. Tiny Nailers by Douglas Honnold was a quintessential modern building. It's a jet plane, a rocket plane of some sort, with its roof line sweeping up and its wings folding backwards to almost as if to take off. A building which really captured the excitement of modern technology in modern life at the time. Wayne McAllister's Bob's Big Boy is another example. Stanley Meston's McDonald's, first built in Phoenix, and then the second one built in Downey. It's still standing. It's qualified for the National Register of Historic Places, but a building which captures a new way of living with the automobile. Ladd and Kelsey, with a much more upscale and elegant restaurant, stuffed shirt restaurant in Newport Beach as well, but using the same curves and technology and modern engineering that the McDonald's does. Denny's as well, designed by Arme and Davis, the Southern California invention of the California coffee shop, which spread across the nation, as well as by Arme and Davis, the Lions Coffee Shop. These are found throughout the state. There's still a couple of examples remaining up in Northern California. Oregon Campbell and Wong renovating an old building in Sausalito for on Dean's Restaurant, a modern design using wood screens and modern furniture and the views beyond in a very simple, direct manner. Car dealerships. This is a Buick, well, originally a Packard dealership by Bernard Mabeck, right on Lake Merritt. It actually, in fact, is on the site of the new Catholic Cathedral, which sits on Lake Merritt as well. But the car culture demanded service stations like this, dealerships like this, or like this. This is a Mercury dealership on Wilshire Boulevard, using those arches, it's the structural arches which we saw in McDonald's, but here creating a wraparound dealership where the cars could be seen from the street. Casa de Cadillac, this is currently, as it was in very good condition. It's being renovated, and we're a little bit concerned about how far the renovation is going to go. A brilliant 1949 building for the car culture. Supermarkets as well from the time. This prototype was designed by Worcester, Bernardi, and Emmons, known for their high-rises and their elegant campuses, but also designing supermarkets. As this is designed by Smith & Williams, another well-known Southern California firm, designing a Ralph's supermarket. So we can see that in these various supermarkets, average buildings are being designed creatively by good California architects. Movie theaters, Westwood, motels. This is by Ernest Kump, Ricky's Motel in Palo Alto, as well as the Cabana, also in Palo Alto, which happened to be the source, the model, literally, for Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. Same architect, same owner. Villa Roma, no longer standing on Fisherman's Wharf, by Anshin and Allen. Bank buildings, home savings, and loan by Millard Sheets. Or this Western Savings in Sunnyvale, still standing. Or this Van Nuys Savings by August Sarmiento, as well as this Saratoga Valley Savings and Loan, also by Sarmiento. It was standing the last time I drove by there. And more recently, 1982, we have a bank building designed by Frank Gehry, still standing as well. Car washes, gas stations, stores, women's stores for clothing, neon signs, all of these are part of the California culture. As well as this is an Orbach store, a prototype design by none other than Caesar Pelli, who's gone on to bigger things. Not necessarily better, but certainly bigger. Shopping centers from Bullock's, Pasadena, to Stonestown by Victor Gruen, by Welton Beckett. Both of these are by Welton Beckett. Some details of Stonestown show its modernist heritage. Robinson's in Beverly Hills, seen on the left and visited by famous people on the right. This building threatened with demolition now. Sears prototypes designed by Styles O'Clements as well, seen throughout the state. Shopping centers by Victor Gruen in Century City. Vernacular thrifty marts as well, but with a modern style. The interiors of these, fleeing Topanga Canyon by Victor Gruen, shows how light, nature, courtyards, etc., all were modern additions to the modern shopping mall. Supermarkets as well with their modern graphics, or this shopping center in Palo Alto by John Carl Warnecke. East Ridge Mall in San Jose, use of adaptation of the brutalist style adapted to the big boxes of shopping centers, and the Valco in San Jose as well. Or this also by Victor Gruen in Marin County. On the lower right you can see an Eichler house, also in Marin County, and you can see how the shopping center designed by Victor Gruen created a unified landscape between the houses and the shopping centers. Town and country ranch-style shopping centers were quite common, both Northern and Southern California. And when postmodernism came along in the 1970s as well, the West Side Pavilion in Westwood by John Jurdy carried on that new style. California is also known for its high-tech workplaces, from movie studios and new technology needing a new type of factory building, to the Disney studios in 1940 by Kem Weber, to the great high-tech campuses of Silicon Valley. This is the IBM, the first IBM tech center designed for San Jose, for Silicon Valley in 1950 as well. But you see a conscious effort to create color, to create landscape, to create cafeterias, to create places for people. This was a great innovation in workplaces. In Southern California, Ed Stone's Stewart Pharmaceutical building as well was one that was so modern, so new, that it was put on the itinerary for Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet premier, when he visited California in 1959. This was kind of the ultimate of the modern American factory by Edward Durrell Stone. Tradition continued in this not too clear slide with Teledyne in the 1960s, designed by Caesar Pelli. And of course, the movie industry, the television industry, the radio industry, the CBS building by William Lescaz, another television studio by Claude Thielman for Don Lee Television, CBS building by William Pereira and Luckman from the early 1950s. And in San Francisco, this also had its modern television stations. There's an aspect of California architecture which goes against the grain of serious modernism, and it has to do with California being a beautiful place to live, a wonderful, relaxing place to live. The weather is gorgeous, the scenery is gorgeous, and going all the way back, certainly to Bernard Maybeck, this is the Christian Science Church, you see just how color and form and shape are part of his idea of modernism. The same form and color and shape was picked up by Charles Eames, 40 years later as well. And in vernacular architecture, like the Tale of the Pup, as well, in which there was nothing wrong with having fun, with having whimsical shapes, whimsical colors. Joseph Magnan's store by Rudy Baumfeld, and Victor Gruen as well. Bold colors, light fixtures, furniture, indoor landscaping, and even this sign for Valley Fair designed by Victor Gruen as well. has that sense of fun and delight, which is part of California architecture and which deserves to be treated as seriously, though with as much fun as it deserves. Millard Sheets in his home savings have colorful murals, as well as in the, well, I think it's coming up a bit. This is the temple, the Masonic Temple on Nob Hill as well, with these plastic murals integrated into them. Playgrounds as well. The Nut Tree in Vacaville. We see, and Ghirardelli Square as well, renovated by Worcester Bernardi and Emmons. We just see exactly how shapeliness, fun, delight are part of the California modern tradition, both north and south. In San Francisco, the Jack Tar Hotel, as it originally was, expressed all of that color and form, though it was quickly painted out into this extremely dull form that we see it today, unfortunately. Public architecture, the great new campuses of UC Irvine, from opening in 1965, and at the same time UC Santa Cruz in the lower right. UC Irvine designed by William Pereira. This part of UC Santa Cruz planned by John Carl Warneke, but this was designed by Worcester Bernardi and Emmons. Aspects of the two halves of the state. In public architecture, LAX and San Francisco International also showed modernism, but with different interpretations. And the Oakland Airport, one of my favorites, by John Carl Warneke, has recently been really, really badly treated with this new steel trellis way around the car drop-off area. The Bay Bridge as well, a piece of modern engineering. The Golden Gate Bridge, also opening in the 30s. And the Music Center on Bunker Hill in downtown Los Angeles by Welton Beckett as well. Really a great example of imperial California architecture. This was a time in the mid-1960s where California culture, engineering, aerospace, oil, certainly the entertainment industry, was colonizing the world. And in this power and magnificence of the Music Center, you can see that quality. Also echoed by the Masonic Temple that I was mentioning earlier on Nob Hill. These are buildings of great confidence, great grandeur, great art integrated into them. The murals by Emil Norman. Oakland Museum, opened in 1969, designed by Roach and Dinkeloo. And the Getty Museum, opened in the 1970s. Also, you can see the diversity of approaches to cultural buildings. Bruce Goff's Shinnecoin Pavilion at Lehigh County Museum. This is the City Hall for Fremont, the City Hall for Palo Alto by Edward Durrell Stone, schools from the 1930s by Richard Neutra, from the 1950s by John Carl Warneke. You have the innovations in education and educational architectures. This is the Warneke School, and you can see that it has this curved street running through it with the classrooms off of it and natural sunlight coming from the top. The Cal State system, this is Cal State in Southern California, Dominguez Hills by Quincy Jones, using different levels and landscaping and a modern structure. And then Ernest Kumpf's Foothill College as well, using in Los Altos, Northern California, using wood and this gently sloping, almost Japanese style of roof. John Carl Warneke at Stanford, Craig Elwood at Art Center in Pasadena. In churches, Lloyd Wright's Wayfarers Chapel in Palos Verdes, Warren Callister's Mills College Chapel, also a church in Mill Valley by Warren Callister, and by Philip Johnson and Jin Wong, the Crystal Cathedral in Garden Grove. You see an example of the diversity of public buildings. A library by Edward Durrell Stone in Palo Alto, as well as his hospital in Palo Alto, which just uses the concrete in extraordinary ways. Anshin and Allen above Berkeley in the Science Center. Really, the greatest public works of the mid-20th century is the water system in California. And we see, which runs through the state, well, we see that, again, that confidence expressed in the Department of Water and Power on Bunker Hill in Los Angeles as a piece of architecture. Recreation architecture, I'm going to have to speed through some of these, but it'll give you an idea of the diversity. Disneyland, opening in 1955. Marineland, designed by William Pereira and Charles Luckman, also in the mid-1950s. The Cinerama Dome by Welton Beckett. The Sports Arena in Los Angeles by Welton Beckett. And, of course, the Dodger Stadium and Candlestick Park, both examples built in the early 1960s as well, with a structurally expressive modern style. Oakland Coliseum was built in the same spirit, but has been just very badly treated in recent years. Suburbia was not just known for its little boxes made of ticky-tacky on the hillside, but in fact there's a strong tradition in California of planning. This is Carthay Circle with a theater and residences and a school and offices around it from the late 1920s. Westwood also from the same time, a planned community planned around the university. Miracle Mile, Wilshire Boulevard, a linear downtown, again planned with high-rise towers interspersed with low-rise buildings. A new form of town with new types of department stores, the May Company by A.C. Martin from 1940. The freeway systems coming in as well. This is a neighborhood cleared for the 405 freeway, but which would transform California in a way that Frank Lloyd Wright, in his Broadacre City proposal for a modern city, could well have approved of. His capital, his Marin County Civic Center is in many ways the Capitol building of Broadacre City, of this new suburban metropolis. Other planning ideas were Century City in Los Angeles as well, which used modern planning, modern forms, modern architecture. Or Foster City, planned by Edward Durrell Stone as well in Northern California. The suburban metropolises of California are planned. They are not just haphazard. This is a major point. Marina del Rey, another planned community. 3rd Street Mall in Santa Monica, creating taking a car-oriented street, turning it to pedestrian use as well. And in Pomona Mall. All over the state, you see shopping centers, pedestrian malls, downtowns, landscaping, parks, this park by Robert Royston in Santa Clara as well, where planning ideas are instituted in the development of our cities. The Kaiser Center by Welton Beckett also had a rooftop garden on its parking garage. And in even 1970s condominiums, nature is combined with the houses in a planned manner. Let's see, I was going to go to getting near the end here. The Ranch House is a Northern and Southern California house style from William Worcester's Gregory Farmhouse near Santa Cruz to Cliff May's ranch houses in Southern California. And often the ranch house was built in mass-produced housing, and its lifestyle of outdoor patios. Now, oftentimes people will point to these prefabricated houses from World War II as the source for these mass-produced houses that transformed suburbia. But in fact, it was developers like Marlowe Burns in Westchester and David Bohannon up in Northern California creating mass-produced houses. That's David Bohannon there in the middle. But mass production of houses, Henry Kaiser also, they figured out how to mass produce houses. And here you see Lakewood under construction. It was a modern factory assembly line, but built in place, and including shopping centers, schools, churches, theaters, etc., as part of the planning process. It wasn't just Joseph Eichler with his Eichler houses and their modern interiors that created modern homes. Palmer and Kreisel created modern architecture for tract housing. Gregory Ain also created modern tract housing. Sunset Magazine promoted this, and in this particular example by Cliff May of a small prefabricated ranch house, which was built first of all in Cupertino, Northern California, even though Cliff May was a Southern California architect. The mutual housing proposals in Brentwood were one high-art example of it. But we see it continued into the 1960s and 70s, the sense of planning in Irvine, California, planned by William Pereira and Associates as well, carrying on this tradition of planned architecture for suburbia. Just going to quickly go through some of these, the high-rises. This is downtown Los Angeles in the 1940, downtown San Francisco, Market Street in the 60s. But I want to make particular note of two architects, Styles O. Clements in his Richfield building, downtown Los Angeles, and his counterpart, Timothy Pfluger in Northern California. This is a telephone building as well. Both deco buildings, deco skyscrapers of just extreme magnificence and excellence of design, which influenced high-rise buildings ever after. The Capitol Record buildings under construction, Prudential building, part of the Miracle Mile, the building by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, Owings and Merrill, and Hertzka and Knowles on Market Street, the Zellerbach building, one of the first modern glass box skyscrapers. But then we have the curving skyscrapers of the Kaiser Center in Oakland, the polygonal skyscrapers of the Union Oil building in Los Angeles, the structurally expressive Alcoa building, and the brutalist buildings of Charles Luckman, or Edward Durrell Stone, or Anshin and Allen in San Francisco. Here's its penthouse. Or Minoru Yamasaki at the in Century City, the Century City Hotel. Edward Durrell Stone did high-rises as well. The Arco Towers, which replaced the Richfield building by A.C. Martin. And then this glass skin building designed by Caesar Pelli and Anthony Lumsden in the late 1960s, with its glass skin, which transformed the high-rise. Multiple housing, this goes along with the idea of planning. California does have planning. Park La Brea in Southern California is matched by Park Merced up in San Francisco as well. High-rise and garden apartments as well in a planned community are part of the California tradition. And here are a few other examples as well of multiple housing. Okay, just to wrap up, I'm focusing now on the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, and the history of that period that we need to, as preservationists, be looking at. It was the beginning of Frank Gehry's career. This from the late 1960s, the Lou Danziger studio on Melrose in West Hollywood. But the late 60s were also a time when Charles Moore returned to California and began to spread the ideas of Sea Ranch into office buildings, into domestic architecture, into the faculty club at UC Santa Barbara as well. These are the buildings that we need to be looking at now as the landmarks of the future. Kresge College, also by Charles Moore up at UC Santa Cruz. And the Lee Burns House by Moore from 1974. The glass structure that I pointed out earlier by Caesar Pelli was brought to fruition in the Pacific Design Center, opened in 1975. And a host of young architects, including Frank Gehry on the right, and right behind him, Tom Main, now a Pritzker Prize winner. But both in Southern California and in Northern California brought a new energy to California architecture in the 1980s and into the 90s. Finally, here we have some sketches of Northern California and San Francisco landmarks. City Hall, Palace of Fine Arts, Coit Tower, all designed by local architects. In recent decades, California cities have gone outside California to Richard Meyer to design the San Jose City Hall, or Arato Isuzaki to design MoCA in Los Angeles. But as a result, we have lost a sense of our own local architects and our own local traditions, and nurturing our local architects so that they can design the important monuments. That's why this overview of California history is important, because we need to understand the strengths of California architecture. We also need to understand because we're losing a lot of them. On the left is a science building at Stanford by Harry Weiss. It was torn down last year. It was a green building from 1970. It's torn down. Threat now is Edward Durrell Stone's Stanford Hospital. Stanford plans to tear it down as well when the new hospital is built. But we need to understand how this building and others like it really do express something unique about California architecture. And so I hope I've given a sense of what this is all about. The modern roots, the traditions of Southern California and Northern California, sometimes distinctive, but also creating a common California architecture. So with that, I think I'll pass it back to Jennifer, and we'll see if there are any questions.
All right, thank you, Alan. So at this time, if you have any questions in regards to the presentation today or modern architecture in general, if you could go ahead and type them into the box, and Alan would be happy to answer them.
Yes.
I don't have any yet, but Alan, if there's any other thoughts that you had while we're seeing if people type in their questions right now.
Yeah, I'd like to repeat one thing that I said earlier about the need for research. I threw out a lot of different names, some of which would be familiar, some which are not so familiar. And there's a tremendous need here in California now for people to find out about Foster Rhodes Jackson, about Alan Morris, about Jack Hilmer, about any number of architects who were not as well known in their days, were not as well publicized in their days, but who added tremendously to the California to California architecture. So again, I just emphasize, if you're looking for a subject or an interest in one of these architects or buildings, we really need people to look into that.
That was actually one of the questions. I think you read somebody's mind.
Oh.
If it's possible, if you could send me, you know, that list, I can forward it with the email that I sent to the group later today.
Okay, good.
So the question is, do you think there is still a distinction between Northern and Southern California architecture?
I think there are certain distinctions, but they are not as important as the commonalities, I would say. Again, the big overarching themes of California architecture are innovation, experimentation, and the atmosphere to experiment, and then also the new lifestyle and the new urban style of suburbs as well. Those to me are common in Northern and Southern California. They're the really big themes, I think. Now there are distinct interpretations of those themes by different architects in different parts of the state, which are, you know, very, very interesting. The climate does vary. The light does vary. The culture is pretty much pretty common throughout the state. There are certain themes which begin in one part of the state but spread very amiably to other parts of the state. So overall, I think it's more valuable to look at the common themes between Northern and Southern than it is to look at and try to defend and fend off the differences between the states. And again, just to add to that, it's not just the Bay Area and Los Angeles. San Diego has a rich tradition. The Central Valley, Fresno, Bakersfield, Modesto, Sacramento has a very rich tradition. Tahoe as a recreational area also is part of this story, which obviously I wasn't able to get to. I had too much to do as it was, but this story goes on of the diversity of California architecture responding to different areas and cities.
Okay, the next question is, do you have any thoughts on the Long Beach City Hall by Allied Architects, circa 1973?
The Long Beach City Hall. Boy, it's not coming to mind right away. It's a modern building, I presume. I've got my Gephardt and Winter guide right here with me. Long Beach. I'm going to look it up and see if I can remind myself of
Gibbs, Killingsworth, Homolka, Wing, etc.
Ah, okay, yes. That's interesting. That Killingsworth, Brady, and Associates in particular are known primarily in the history books from their houses and buildings from the 40s, 50s, and 60s in particular. It was a little bit later building, but just underscores the fact that a number of these great architects known from one period continue to have good careers afterwards. We should not forget about them. Let's see. I'm not sure I can comment specifically on the building. I haven't been there in recent times to really give you a good take on that. But next time I'm in Long Beach, I'll definitely take a look. I know that Killingsworth has a lot of great office buildings throughout that area, which are still in use and still in good shape.
Next question. I was particularly struck by your comment about color and playfulness in California architecture. Has this translated anywhere else in America, or is it distinctly regional and therefore denigrated?
You do see it elsewhere. Again, one of these links between Cranbrook and Detroit and Los Angeles is this sense of play and color. It comes from Charles Eames, but also Alexander Girard and the sculptor Harry Bertoia. So yes, you will find some of that. You will definitely find it in areas that were influenced by the arts and crafts as well. The work of Will Price in Philadelphia, who was also influenced by the arts and crafts movement, he has these elements. He designed, for example, a hotel, the Blenheim Hotel in Atlantic City in 1906, which had decoration based upon sea creatures, shells and fish, and seaweed, and so forth. So there is, there are elements of that delight, that colorfulness, that play elsewhere. But I think it does relate very much. I think it was developed to a great extent here in California.
All right. Are there any more questions from our audience? Well, we're really excited about our upcoming conference in Orange County, and we hope to see some of these resources that you showed today. And I know that you're helping us with planning some of those visits, so this is really exciting to see some of it.
I'm going to be giving a talk specifically on Orange County architecture for the conference as well. That'll pick up on some of these themes as it was expressed in Orange County.
So we hope all of you are able to come in May of next year for that conference. And as you know, a lot of the information on our education and our conference and other programs can be found on our website. So if there's no more questions, I want to thank you all again for joining us today. Later today, you will receive an email with a link to a survey, and we would appreciate any feedback you have on this webinar as well as recommendations for future topics. And we hope that you have a good rest of the afternoon. And thank you very much, Alan.
Good. You're very welcome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day.